I'll call for valedictory speeches.
Madam Speaker.
The member for Butler.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
That's the first time.
You remember? Leader was going to tell me a few things about that. Madam Speaker, I entered this chamber to make my final speech after 24 years as a member and 8 as serving as the state's Attorney General. I entered the chamber in a swirl of emotion, of gratitude, of sincere humility, and a measure of pride. I want to start by expressing my profound gratitude to the Western Australian branch of the Australian Labor Party, its administrative committee, its executive, and the members of my branch who for the last 6 elections, nearly 24 years, have supported me as their candidate to this chamber. I'm truly grateful for the opportunity. Secondly, I'd like, and without them, I'd be nothing in terms of public life. I am a servant of my party and of the state of Western Australia. I'd also like to express my profound gratitude to Professor Miles Prince of the Peter Mac Cancer Centre in Melbourne, who, after I was diagnosed in 2005 with a terminal load of T-cell lymphoma, Professor Prince admitted me onto one of his experimental trials, and I credit him with saving my life. And without his administrations, I also would not be here today. I also wish to express my gratitude to the many members of caucus, the Labor caucus, who over the years have supported me, and since the year 2009 have unanimously supported me after each election to the front bench, to the ministry of the government. And it's been a wonderful caucus over the years. You've got to actually have been in it to experience the unity of it, that everyone has their say, and the collective wisdom of the caucus. So the caucus elects us to the front bench, and it was back in 2009, the thoroughly decent, likeable and wonderful man, the Honourable Eric Ripper, who was then the leader of the opposition, selected me as the Shadow Attorney General. When he was succeeded by the Honourable Mark McGowan, he chose me again. And then, of course, upon the election of the Labor government in 2017, not only did the caucus support me, but the Honourable Premier of the day, Mark McGowan, supported me as the Attorney General, and I'm very grateful, obviously. Following his retirement, our present Premier, Roger Cook, MLA, Honourable Roger Cook, kept me on as the Attorney General, and I was ever so grateful for that too, to have the continuing opportunity to participate in law reform for the public of Western Australia. Beyond the gratefulness is the humility to hear the former Premier Mark McGowan speak of the work I was doing as he did in this chamber, citing from the Power magazine of the Australian Financial Review, as I recall, that they had put me down as one of the 5 most influential lawyers in Australia, not because of me personally, because of the work I was doing within this government. Very humbling to hear that. And then again, when I announced that I would not be standing for re-election, it was a very humbling experience to stand next to our Premier and hear him speak of me publicly and my work, as he did in this chamber. Amazing. I also have been fortunate and blessed to receive a lot of feedback from the legal profession and business profession. And only this morning, just before I gave this speech, received a text from a King's Counsel, recently very senior Supreme Court Justice, congratulating me and reflecting that I was the most influential and productive AG since the introduction of the Criminal Code, which was by the late Tom Walker MLA, also a Labor attorney back in 1911. To receive these sort of accolades brings you down to earth, and you feel, I feel humble to be included in the same thought process as those sort of giants. I said I feel proud as well. In 2017, with the election of the McGowan government, there was the birth of an epoch in Western Australia, a transition, and I've been around politics and in royal commissions for many years. I observed the transition from the politics of 60s and 70s when the North-West gas was developed, etc. But from 2017 on, a new epoch dawned upon this state. It was marked by economic responsibility. We saw that all the ministers, the judges and everyone had their pays capped. We all took it together. We all put our shoulder to the wheel to bring the finances of this state back into good order. And when I say an epoch, you can't look around this city and help but notice the massive change physically with our freeways, rail, the lot. And we know that Westport's coming and the development of AUKUS down at Henderson. The state has changed forever. And I'm so proud to have been selected by my party to be a senior minister in this government. When I talk about an epoch, it's a period of time which is not yet finished. This government deserves to be re-elected, and I'm quietly confident that it will be re-elected, and this period will endure for some time yet. But in future generations, people will look back onto this period and onto this government that I'm proud to have been a senior member of, as the mark, as the standard by which other governments will be judged. Were they as good in managing the economy as the McGowan and Cook governments? Were they as concerned about community safety as the McGowan and Cook governments? Were they concerned about social advancement as the McGowan and Cook governments? These will be the measures of future governments. And for me to reflect that I have been chosen to be a senior minister in such a government is a source of pride. This government has achieved a lot, and as an Attorney General, my fiat has been obviously in law reform, and within the Attorney General's portfolio there exists about 20% of the state statute book and many commissions and the like. And people kept asking me, could they have a look at my speech? And I kept on promising to do one. But they gave me a list of legislation. I said, well, you've got to refer to your legislation. Well, I don't want to read it. I don't want to go through it. That would sound like a vanity project. There's about 92 pieces of 92 pieces of legislation on this spreadsheet. Put that aside. I did bring a picture to Parliament, actually. That's easier to do than a speech, and I'll refer to that later. But many people ask me, well, what's your favourite piece of legislation? Of those 92 bits, can you name your favourite bit? Well, you see, I was born here, not physically born here, but I'm born here on the wings, born here on the wings of a searing sense of justice. And I wanted to get here to try and make things, from what I'd seen in a quarter of a century in the legal profession, more just for all of the people and better access for justice. And from the 92, I had a look at some of them, and my favourite ones were all of those pieces of legislation that made it more just for my fellow citizens in Western Australia, that made it more just and made it more fair and made it safer. We lifted the statute of limitations for all of the victims of child sexual abuse. We introduced the custody notification service for Indigenous people being arrested and taken into custody. We lifted imprisonment for fines enforcement, which was just seeing mainly poor people being imprisoned and rich people paying their fine. We introduced the unexplained wealth jurisdiction to the CCC and appointed a Deputy Commissioner for the CCC to concentrate on unexplained wealth to try and undercut the business model of organised crime. And it's working. We introduced unlawful signature legislation so that the police could harass and harry the bikies of this town, and they have. We know what they think about these laws because they put that T-shirt out, Mr. Quigley, F your laws. If I was standing again, that would be one of my third-party endorsements. It would be one side of the sheet of paper. The other side of the sheet of paper would be Mr. Palmer's recent advertisement saying John Quigley is the biggest embarrassment in Australia. I would take that as a third-party endorsement as well. We changed the dangerous sex offenders legislation to broaden that out to high-risk dangerous offenders and reversed the onus of proof so that for the primary conditions, the prisoner had to prove on the balance of probabilities that he, and it's usually he, that he would abide by the primary conditions. There's a whole lot, but it's not just too vain to read it all. It's already been reported. There was fun legislation too, which was serious, and that was the Mineralogy Iron Ore Amendment Agreement. I've got to say, it was serious in that we had to protect all Western Australians from the unconscionable and avaricious lunge for our money by Mr. Palmer, and to do it in a closeted way that no one would hear about it, including my cabinet colleagues. And I can always remember when the plan was well advanced after I'd given instructions to draw the bill, going along to Premier McGowan's office, and as Premier Cook probably knows, letting myself in. And he said, "What do you want now?" But I sat him down pretty quick. I said, "It's about a $30 billion claim against us, Mark. And what are we going to do about it?" And I unravelled "Don't tell a soul," he said, "don't tell a soul." And we didn't. And we developed the bill. And in developing the bill, I'm indebted to the staff of the State Solicitor's Office, the former State Solicitor, the Honourable Nick Egan, and his staff, working very quietly. I'm indebted to the Solicitor General of the day, the wonderful Mr. Joshua Thompson, for his constitutional advice. And of course we brought the bill in here, and with the support of the opposition, at short notice, passed it. In the meantime, we passed it sort of overnight, but they had to go to the council, so Mr Palmer rushed into the Brisbane court and registered the arbitrarial award. Oh, wow, my heart sunk then. I thought, he's got behind us. Then we had to brief council to go to the court in Queensland to have that ex parte order set aside before Mr Justice Martin in September of 2020. And I always recall Mr Justice Martin, because we included in that bill, you'll all remember, members, an indemnity that if Mr Palmer ever took action under the Free Trade Agreement and got a judgment, or if Mineralogy did that, then we put a clause in that said that Mr Palmer will statutorily indemnify the state for the damages. So he's claiming, they're claiming 300 billion, and we've got to write a claim back against him for 300 billion. But just in case there was any slippage there, we included a Henry VIII clause, which the judge described as the mother of all Henry VIII clauses. He said this clause empowers the minister to proclaim any other measure to defeat Mr Palmer. He went on to describe the bill itself as a juggernaut. They'd constructed a juggernaut which destroyed everything in its path. And it did. And so I was satisfied and pleased with that bill. I was called in from time to time as a bit of a pinch hitter on other matters, like the Bell settlement, which had bogged down. I dealt directly with Mr Louis Rattenberg's bankers that flew down from Singapore, with other interest, the chairman of ICWA, to try and approach this from a different way, and we were able to settle that for $650 million. I was called in as a pinch hitter when there was complications with the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Act, and I remembered when I was reading that what the judge that I practiced before, wonderful jurist, the late Sir Francis Burt, and a governor of the state said, often when I appeared before him, kiss it, keep it simple, stupid. And we were able to do some modest amendments to the Act, which delivered everything that the Aboriginal people and people wanted. So it was always nice and interesting to be called in as a pinch hitter on some problems. So this whole process, I think that I've done my best to try and contribute to the development of our community. It's an awesome responsibility to be given this job. I understand that the Attorney General in a Labor Party carries the social aspirations of our great movement. There are other important, very important ministerial positions and departments, but in terms of social reform, that responsibility largely rests with the Attorney, and in that regard, we've tried to protect victims. I've brought in several chances of amendments to family and domestic violence laws, and will continue to do so, and with further announcements to come. We try to do what we can to protect victims, and I've tried. So I've tried to have an effect on this Parliament and upon the community. I must say that in the process of 24 years, it's had an effect on me. Reflect back to my maiden speech and now my valedictory. It's had an effect on me, and I think it has helped me dealing with these problems and these people, like Mallard, like Jodie Gore, who I released from the life sentence, to help me grow, perhaps to become a better man and a bigger person. It was back in 1983, September 1983, that a very young 16-year-old John Patt died in police custody after a fight with police outside of the Victoria Hotel Roban. I was briefed to go up on the same day of his death to look after the police officers up there, and the town was going off, there was riots. I then appeared at the committal hearing, or the coroner's court, I'm sorry, where the coroner committed my 5 clients to a manslaughter trial in the Supreme Court, where I subsequently appeared with some colleagues and secured the acquittal of the 5 officers. Suffice to say, I was not well regarded by the Indigenous population of Roban at the time. I was very moved last year when the community up there and this year were holding a concert, a peace concert, to memorialise the life of John Pat, it being 40 years since his passing, and to celebrate what Roban had become. Because the Injibati people, from their settlement with FMG, they bought the old Victoria Hotel, and now, which was just a river of alcohol and trouble. It's now called the Injibati State, and it's owned by the Injibati people. And I was invited back to Roban by John Pat's family, who said they were inviting me back in recognition of the efforts I made to bring justice. The picture. This picture's pretty precious to me. It's taken at a concert with John Pat's younger brother, Glenn, and his nephew, Lyndon Cook. And to sit at this celebratory concert amongst John's family, wow, it sort of closed a bit of a circle in my life. Closed a bit of a circle in my life. But it's not all about legislation. There's another important function that I had to perform when I came here, when we came to government, and that was restoring a proper relationship between the executive branch of government and the judiciary, which had fallen into disrepair. To recognise the judiciary are the third branch of government, the third branch and independent branch of government. And it behoves an Attorney General to protect the independence of the judiciary and speak up for it, and put you in an awkward situation sometimes with your colleagues who might not at all times sharply appreciate that they are an independent branch of government. They make laws, the courts make laws by recognising rights that have hitherto not been recognised. Think Mabo. It was the courts, not the Parliament, that conferred land rights on First Nations peoples because they recognised a right. The independent courts stand as a bulwark between the excesses of the executive and at times the legislature. And they have the power, and do from time to time, strike down legislation as being unconstitutional. We experienced that ourselves in the case of McGuinty versus Marquet and the repeal of a constitutional section about embedding an absolute vote when amending the Electoral Act. It's very important for all of our citizens to have an independent judiciary that will be unaffected, by the colour of the executive or legislative government of the day. Someone that the citizens can turn to independent of the lawmakers for protection. Think James Price Point and the compulsory acquisition that was to take place for the hub. Some of us would regret the decision and say, well, there could have been a hub there, a common user hub. It doesn't matter. An independent court looked at the process and held that the process of the government was defective and set aside the claim, set aside the acquisition. Finally, well, not finally, but I've got to acknowledge the support I've had from the Solicitors General, who have been marvellous, the Honourable Peter Quinlan SC, now the Chief Justice, when he was Solicitor General in all those early bills of nobody, no parole and different things we were doing, we had to make them constitutional. We had to make them sound. We've seen what's happened in Canberra with the bracelet laws. Theirs got struck down, ours haven't, because we had the best constitutional advice. And Mr. Joshua Thompson SC, one of the great legal minds and forensic legal minds of our city and of our time, who represented us in the Palmer litigation, who represented us when Palmer tried to challenge our closed border, when he was joined by the Morrison government. They weren't planning on meeting Joshua Thompson at bar table, and before the case was over, the Morrison government had slinked out the side door of the court and left Mr. Palmer to his own. Now, thank you very much, Joshua. And now, with Mr. Thompson moving on, we've got the very sound and wonderful Solicitor General in Craig Bitter. I also acknowledge the presence in the court, in the Parliament today, of our wonderful State Solicitor, Dr. Graham Hill, who was formerly the Director of Legal Aid, who refurbished legal aid and brought in all of these new programs to make justice more accessible for the vulnerable. I particularly thank the Chief Justice, Quinlan, Chief Judge Wager of the District Court, my friend President Quayle, President of the Children's Court, Stephen Heath, the Chief Magistrate, for the assistance and guidance they've given me in helping make appointments that reflect our community. I've made 130 appointments to judicial office, and I was asked the other day about the representation of women. There's 142 judicial officers in Western Australia. 71 of them are women now at the end of our second term in government. 71. We also have on the bench for the first time an Indigenous Yamaji man in Honourable Justice Michael Lundberg in the Supreme Court, Honourable David McLean in the District Court, his brother Gavin and another two Indigenous people in the Magistrates Court. We've got Asian women on the District Court. We have now changed the face of the court. Not I'm but one of 17. And as I said at the outset, none of this would have been possible. None of it would have been possible had it not been for the support that I've received from my party, from the caucus, and from Premiers McGowan and Cook, to whom I am eternally grateful for this opportunity, the most special part of my life. Thank you. Thanks very much, Amber.
Well done, Mark.
Thanks.
We were trying to prompt you about your family and stuff. You nearly cried.
Lovely. Okay. Thanks, mate. Thanks, buddy.
Great job, mate.
Thank you.
How you been called?
My grandson. My grandson. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Cass. Cassie. Thank you. Thanks, Hannah.
Oh, okay.
Bye-bye. Thank you. David. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thanks, Pete. Thank you.
Bravo, and under time. That was excellent.